All right, we've been looking at the separatists and the strangers, together called Pilgrims, who came to New England. We saw how they made it across the Atlantic Ocean, the difficulties that they faced the first year they were here, where half of the people died. But they got their houses built. They have a meeting house built first, of course. They have a community set up. So one thing that they're still uncertain about is what relationship will they have with the natives in the area. And we're going to talk about that today. There were 3 Indians that befriended the Pilgrims during their first year. The first is a man called Samoset. How many have heard of Samoset? All right. He appeared in Plymouth on March 16, 1621. And one of the first questions he asked them was, "Have you any beer?" A strange question to come from a native, asking for beer. Well, he had learned English from some fishermen along the Maine coast, and so he spoke in perfect King's English, as they call it, which was another surprising thing, to hear that coming out of his mouth. And of course, through them, had learned to appreciate English beer. And so that's what he was hoping, that they had some. Well, he explained to them the presence of those corn mounds that they had found and from which they had taken, in what was otherwise an empty cornfield. He told them that the tribe that had lived there, that had harvested that corn, had been wiped out by an epidemic. In other words, an illness had entered in, probably brought there by European fishermen. Maybe something like smallpox, something that they had no natural defense against, and the whole tribe, the whole village, I should say, was wiped out. Well, Samoset knew the chief of the area, and he told the Pilgrims that he would put them into contact with him. And his name was Massasoit. Not pictured there yet. When Massasoit arrived, Massasoit was chief of the Wampanoag tribe, and he was informed by Samoset of the presence of the English. And so he promptly visited the new colony, accompanied by 60 braves and a man called Squanto. How many have heard of Squanto? You find him amusing, do you? Squanto accompanied Massasoit on this visit to Plymouth Plantation. He also spoke perfect English, but it wasn't through contact with English fishermen. He had actually been captured by some English and taken to England in possibly 1614. I have a date. Someone else says 1605. I'm not sure which is correct. But he had been basically captured as a slave. Later, he was allowed to return. Now, Squanto was the last of the Patuxet Indians, for when he returned, his tribe, which had been very aggressive, they were fighters, but his tribe was no longer in existence. His village was the one that had been wiped out. And Massasoit took him in as a member of the Massasoit's tribe. So there are a couple things to be understood from this. One is that, and the Pilgrims certainly saw it this way, that God had protected them from a very aggressive village of Indians that was living right where they decided to live, by wiping them out before they got there. And at the same time, a member of that village, Squanto, was there and not aggressive towards them, but actually offered to help them. And he came to live with them, to teach them how to live in that area. Well, the Wampanoag, and in the process, well, let me tell you first of all, well, he told them where to fish, how to catch eels, which they could use for food, where to catch herring for food, and then using fish also to put as fertilizer in the ground to grow corn, how to stalk and trap game, and then how to grow corn. And they also had a method by which they planted peas with the corn, so that the corn stalk became the trellis that the peas grew upon. Well, the Wampanoag and the Pilgrims established an agreement of trust and friendship. And it's interesting what they determined to do. But it's the relationship they had was not like this cartoon. Strange white men in funny clothes planting crops. They are called pilgrims. And this word pilgrim, what does it mean? Undocumented immigrant. Well, they may have thought of pilgrims that way. But they seemed to be very friendly and wanted to help them. The agreement they had was an excellent agreement. They agreed not to injure each other. They agreed that offenders were punished by the victim's people. So that meant that if a Wampanoag person injured a pilgrim, they would be tried by the pilgrims, by the English, let's say. If an English hurt someone in the Wampanoags, the English person would be tried by the Wampanoags. So that was a pretty fair system. That meant that your own people were not going to let you off if you did something wrong. And then the third thing was that no weapons were permitted when visiting the other people. No weapons allowed. Now here's a map that shows the tribal lands of New England. The Wampanoag are right in this area. Here's the Nauset Indians, the Massachusetts, Pawtucket, and others all around. These are all different tribes, and sometimes they had wars against one another. This is a typical house for the Indians in that area. They call it a wetu. We call it a wigwam. Some people have the impression that all Indians lived in teepees. Of course, that's not true. That's only out in the plains area. And so this would be a typical home. And this is one that's been built just outside of Plymouth Plantation, so you can see how the natives lived. Here's the entire agreement between the Wampanoag and the English. This is when John Carver was still there as governor, and they agreed on these terms. So don't hurt any of the other people. If you did, they'd be punished by the peoples that were hurt. If anything was taken away, it should be restored. If anyone did unjustly war against him, so in other words, they had a treaty where if anybody attacked the English, or if anybody attacked the Wampanoag, that the others would help them. And we'll find that the Wampanoag used the Pilgrims to help them fight some wars against their neighbors. And it tells us how they would establish peace. No, leave their bows and arrows behind them when the Wampanoag come. And that King James would esteem Massasoit as his friend and ally. So our king across the waters would look upon Massasoit as a friend. All right. So Winslow concluded his account of the treaty signing as this. He said, "Well, we cannot yet conceive, but that he is willing to have peace with us, for they have seen our people sometimes alone, 2 or 3 in the woods at work and fowling." What's fowling? F-O-W-L-I-N-G. What would that be? They're in the woods working and fowling. Yeah, fowl is birds. And so they're out there shooting wild birds. As they offered them no harm, as they might easily have done, and especially because he hath a potent adversary, the Narragansetts, that are at war with him, against whom he thinks we may be some strength to him. So in other words, what Winslow is saying is there have been plenty of opportunities if they wanted to hurt our people, they could have, when they're out in the woods working, fowling, and so on, and they didn't. So he thinks that the Wampanoag, and Massasoit in particular, Massasoit is genuine in his desire to be at peace with him. Now we come to October of that year, 1621, what we call the first Thanksgiving. How many of you enjoy Thanksgiving? Yeah. It's a great time, right? Get together with family and mostly eat and watch football, right? All right, now, what are some of the things that, would someone like to write on the board? All right, Steve, can you write pretty? What? Can you write pretty?
Yeah.
Okay.
I try.
All right, let's list some of our favorite Thanksgiving foods. Yeah, that's fine. All right, what do you like to eat at Thanksgiving? What do you associate with Thanksgiving?
Turkey.
Turkey, that's got to be up there, right? Turkey. What else? Stuffing.
Mashed potatoes.
Yeah, mashed potatoes.
Potatoes.
Sweet potatoes.
Pumpkin pie.
Pumpkin pie. Is that it?
Cranberry.
That's all that's on your table? Cranberries, cranberry sauce. Want either one of those? Micah?
Noodles.
Noodles. What do you do with the noodles?
It's just like cream sauce on it. It's really good.
You put it on anything, or just eat it like beside your turkey?
Yeah.
Turkey and noodles. Okay. Yeah, some families have some different traditions. I've heard some pretty strange ones over the years. Sally, what else? Pardon me?
Red one.
Red.
Red.
Oh, bread rolls. Somebody said red rolls.
Yeah, that's it.
Bread or rolls. What else?
Corn.
Corn. We always had pickles. Anybody have pickles? No? Okay. What else? Anything else?
Ham.
What?
Ham.
Ham. Some people use ham at Thanksgiving. Brussels sprouts. We always had applesauce too. You guys have applesauce? Macaroni and cheese. Okay. Sally?
Baked pineapple.
Oh, that sounds good.
We have ambrosia salad.
What kind of salad?
Ambrosia salad.
Ambrosia salad? What is that?
It's like marshmallows. I think like some like sour cream and like fruit in there, and then you just mix it there and you let it set for a little bit, and it's like really sweet.
I've never heard of that.
Gravy.
Gravy. You've got to have gravy on those mashed potatoes, don't we? Anything else? What do you drink at Thanksgiving? Water? Pop, you said? Apple cider? Anything else? Tea?
Wherever I go,
Milk. Got to have milk. We only have one dessert up there, pumpkin pie. Any other desserts? Apple pie, pumpkin rolls. What was that? Ho-ho cake. Cherry pie.
Chocolate pie. Pumpkin rolls.
Somebody said pumpkin rolls already. And would you say chocolate cake?
Chocolate pie.
Chocolate pie. Okay, now, let's think about this. As you look over that list, how many of those do you think they had at the first Thanksgiving? Joey, what do you think? Let's underline the ones we think that they may have had.
Corn.
Corn? Anything else?
Bread.
Bread, turkey,
Potatoes.
potatoes, you say?
Sweet potatoes.
Sweet potatoes. Anything else? Is that it? All right. Now we'll put check marks by the that they actually did. No, tell you what, we'll cross off the ones that they didn't have. We'll do it that way and see what's left. All right, let's see. Okay, here's what was not on the menu. Ham. So cross off ham. Why? There's no evidence they had butchered a pig by this time, even though they had brought pigs. No potatoes, including no sweet potatoes. They didn't really know about potatoes. Potatoes came from South America. By this time they had gotten into Spain and maybe into parts of Europe, but it would be a while before they would make it over to England and then Ireland, which would become famous for growing potatoes. No corn. It was kept dried out at this time of year. Cranberry sauce, they had cranberries, but they had no sugar. So they couldn't make cranberry sauce. They might have had real cranberries for a dessert. So we'll leave that up there because it just says cranberries. No pumpkin pie. They didn't have a recipe for that. They had stewed pumpkin, which would be like squash. So, but no pumpkin pie, so cross that out. Chicken. Nobody said chicken or eggs. They had hens, but it's unknown how many they had left or whether they were laying. No milk. Sorry, Sally. No cows have been aboard, although they might have used goat milk to make cheese. All right, so what did they have? Well, first of all, let me tell you about the festival itself. You can sit down now. Well, I guess okay, let's cross out some other ones. Let's cross off pickles, Brussels sprouts, applesauce. I'm going to have to cross off turkey. Some of it can have turkey. Stuffing, noodles. I'll cross off all those pies and cakes. I'll cross off tea, macaroni and cheese, baked pineapple. I'm not sure about gravy. Cross off salad. They might have had cider. Let's see if that's on my list. We'll leave bread up there, possibly. Okay, so not much that we have on our menu did they have on theirs. I'll tell you what was there in a minute. First of all, they did not celebrate Thanksgiving in November when we do. They celebrated in October. Why? Why October? Why October? Caleb? That's the end of the harvest. That's what they're celebrating if they had a good harvest. Why would you wait till November? No, you wouldn't, because the food's fresh in October. So why do we celebrate it in November? What?
That's when the parade is.
Well, do you think the parade kind of follows the holiday rather than the other way around? Why do we have Thanksgiving in November, Stephen?
This probably isn't right, but did like Halloween spoil it or something?
No.
No.
Something else. There's another holiday that was an encouragement to have it in November. Christmas. It was put in November so that merchants could start the Christmas season shopping. Yeah. Franklin D. Roosevelt was president when it was established that it would be, was it the third Thursday in November? At one point he wanted to change it to an earlier date, closer to October, and the merchants said, no. Well, we don't want it any earlier. We want it closer to Christmas so that we can emphasize Christmas shopping. Of course, now Christmas shopping starts in September, but that was the reason for having it in November. Stephen?
You know that picture over there?
Yes?
Well, I always think it's funny that they like put the turkey there without even like slicing it up or something.
Well, they slice it at the table.
Yeah, but
That's the way it used to be done.
yeah.
You'd see it there, and then the father or grandfather would slice it up, pass it out. It was kind of a ritual in the old days. All right, so they held it in October, and it was not a one-day thing. It was a 3-day festival, and it really and prayer was a part of it, but and giving thanks, but it was all part of a celebration of the harvest. They sent 4 hunters out fowling. We're told specifically they brought back ducks and geese. Some have said, well, they probably brought back turkeys too. But it seems to me that where you hunt for ducks and geese would not be the same place you would hunt for turkeys. Anybody do hunting? Anybody a hunter? All right. Where do you find duck and geese? If you never hunted for them, where would you find ducks and geese? Near water. Where do you find turkey? Do you find turkeys near water? Where do you find turkeys? In your yard?
Yeah.
Well, they wouldn't have found them in their yard. Where would they find turkeys? In the woods. Two different directions. So it seems to me that they probably did not bring back turkeys. Can't say for certain. Well, while they're having this celebration, all of a sudden, Massasoit shows up with 90 braves, and the Pilgrims are a little bit taken aback because how are they going to feed all these extra people? They knew they had enough for them, but weren't sure they had enough for all of those guys. Well, so Massasoit sent some of his braves out to gather game, and they returned with 5 deer. So that helped a lot. So they had venison. We know that, as well as ducks and geese. Okay, the food they ate would have included also boiled lobster, because they had that, clams, eels, as I said, goose and duck. They would have boiled carrots, turnips, and they would have had pumpkins, but not pie, more like squash. They would have had white and brown bread. And for dessert, they had dried berries, which might have included cranberries. Probably not, but could have. And wild plums. What did they drink? They drank red and white wine. Now, there may have been other foods available that they had too, but that's my best guess at what they included in their meal. All right, so are you interested in having an authentic Thanksgiving meal next Thanksgiving? Why not?
Not bad.
Tell your parents you want some eel and some clams, lobster, venison, boiled carrots, turnips. Doesn't sound quite as appetizing, does it? All right, here is a painting that was done. Here's a list of some of the, more specifically, they also might have had seal meat. Let's see, what else did I not mention? They might have had eagles. We know that they ate eagles.
No.
Partridge, swans, cranes. Don't know for sure that they had it, but that's food that was available to them that they might have had, along with peas and beans, onions, lettuce, right? So maybe they did make a salad after all. Grapes. They had walnuts, chestnuts, acorns, and some of these other items. So we don't know if they had any of those, but those were foods that were available to them. All right, so during this celebration, the Indians danced and they showed off their bow and arrow skills, while the Pilgrims engaged in marksmanship contests with their muskets. Now, there are only 2 contemporary accounts of this 1621 Thanksgiving. First is Edward Winslow's account, which he wrote in a letter dated December 12, 1621. And he mentions some of the stuff. He talks about killing fowl, bringing that in, and the recreations that they engaged in, and all of that. Some of which I've told you comes from what he has written. The second description was written about 20 years later by William Bradford in his history of Plymouth Plantation. Now, you think, we think this is a really big deal, but when Bradford's writing his history of the colony, this is what he says. They began now to gather in the small harvest they had, and to fit up their houses and dwellings against winter, being all well recovered in health and strength, and had all things in good plenty. For as some were thus employed in affairs abroad, others were exercising in fishing, about cod and bass and other fish, of which they took good store, of which every family had their portion. All the summer there was no want, and now began to come in store of fowl as winter approached, of which this place did abound when they came first. And besides waterfowl, there was a great store of wild turkeys, of which they took many, besides venison, etc. Besides, they had about a peck of meal a week to a person, and now since harvest, Indian corn to that proportion, which made many afterwards write so largely of their plenty here to their friends in England, which were not feigned, but true reports. Now he's talking about all the stuff they're gathering in for the winter, doesn't really mention there's Thanksgiving celebration. If he does, it's couched within terms that are difficult necessarily to see. All right, so that was the first Thanksgiving that we consider, although we'd have to say that in Jamestown they had a Thanksgiving before this. Well, as they came to November, it looks like things are pretty decent concerning the next winter. They've got lots of food in store. They look like they're a lot healthier than they were before. It looks like they're going to be able to do reasonably well this winter. But on November 11th, 35 new colonists arrived on a ship called the Fortune, and they brought no supplies. Once again, Plymouth Plantation had to struggle during the winter with the extra people. Let's go through a few fun facts about the Pilgrims, the Wampanoag, and Plymouth. There's a page that I have on here. We'll see what I haven't already told you. Let's see. I think I told you the Pilgrims did not name Plymouth. Captain John Smith had explored the New England coast in 1614 and gave his maps to the Prince of Wales, who later became King Charles I, to add names. And Charles put English names on the map, such as Plymouth and the Charles River. The turkey, although it's native to America, by 1620 was a common barnyard fowl in England. So they had brought turkeys over to England and people had them in their backyards. They had actually been brought to Europe 100 years earlier by the Spanish. Okay, we talked about what they ate. Oh, here's something interesting. Pilgrims did not eat in courses, as we know. You know, today, maybe not at home so much, but if you go to a restaurant, you might have an appetizer, you might have a salad, and then comes your main meal. And you know, they didn't divide stuff up like that. And of course, you can't have your dessert until you finish what's on your plate, right? You heard that, haven't you, with your parents? That's not how they did it. All the food was placed on the table at the same time, including dessert. And you ate in whatever order you chose. Sometimes there were 2 courses per meal, but each course might include a salad, fish, fowl, meat, pudding, pottage, and sweets. Now you might think, well, but the kids will eat all the sweet stuff first before the adults ever get a chance at it. The remedy for that was that in a Pilgrim household, the adults sat down to dinner and the children and servants waited on them. So adults ate first. I contend that would be a good idea at all church potlucks. We've been to many in which by the time we got to the food, it was gone, and see kids with their plate piled full of stuff and then throw most of it away. That's a good idea. Of course, you would be considered adults now, so it only applies when you're younger. The Wampanoag Indians that were living nearby were called that because Wampanoag means people of the dawn. It's because they lived to the east of all the other tribes, so they called them people where the sun comes up. And there continues to be Wampanoag communities in southeastern Massachusetts. Massasoit was Sachem, or leader of the Pokanoket Wampanoag before 1620 until his death around 1660. Massasoit in the Wampanoag language means great leader. All right, here's some fun facts about Pilgrim children. Children in 1600s New England had to work hard. Here's the kind of chores they had to do. They had to fetch water from the brook or springs because there's no running water inside. Had to gather firewood, herd animals, gather berries and other wild plants, and help their parents cook, clean, preserve food, plant and harvest crops, and care for younger children. So children had to work from the time they were old enough to do so. But they still had some time to play. They probably played marbles. How many of you ever played marbles when you were a kid? Ball games, board games, and running games. You always go out and run, race. Children were expected to show courtesy to adults, including their parents, by bowing and curtsying to them. How many of you ever done that? All right, for tomorrow, I want you to finish reading the Pilgrim articles if you haven't read them yet. The Pilgrim reading, finish it up for tomorrow.
You just said.